What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Tuesday, September 7th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay, guys, we have a 12-game slate tonight, and I've got a ton of great picks for you. So let's get into this. At the pitcher position, I like Garrett Cole with a 13% pitching advantage over a low-salary batting team, the Toronto Blue Jays. Garrett Cole pitches his best ball versus righty batters, only giving up a .554 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 7 righties here tonight. On top of that, the Blue Jays have only hit 24 of his last 125 pitches. That's a 192 batting average. He's 11,300 FanDuel salary. He's 500 more on DraftKings. Projected at 39.7 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 2.73. Record is 14-6 on the season. Pitching an average of 100 pitches per game. Averaging 45 fantasy points per game. He's been on fire, scoring 73, 55, and 46 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So he's just in a fantastic spot here tonight. The splits are great, and the pitcher versus batter matchup is also good. So I hope he doesn't let us down. So I like Garrett Cole here versus the Toronto Blue Jays. Okay, now if you want to take a risk and save some salary at the pitcher position, always a high risk, high reward play when you come down in salary off your pitcher. But take a look at James Kaprielian with a 20% pitching advantage over a low salary batting team, the Chicago White Sox. James Kaprielian is only giving up a .518 OPS versus righties, and he's facing 5 righties here tonight. He also pitches okay versus switch hitters, facing 3 switch hitters. He's not good versus lefties, but he's only facing 1 lefty. So there's no pitches versus the White Sox yet. So who knows what we're going to get here. And James Kaprielian is 8,300 FanDuel salary, 500 less on DraftKings, projected at 28.2 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 3.87. Record is 7-4 on the season, pitching an average of 90 pitches per game, averaging 30 fantasy points per game. He scored 12, 21, and 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like James Kaprielian as a high-risk, high-reward pitcher here versus the Chicago White Sox. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Freddie Freeman with a 17% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Paulo Espino. Freddie Freeman is batting 30% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.079 OPS versus righties. And Paulo Espino, he's giving up a .713 OPS versus lefties. Freddie Freeman is 2 for 5, batting 400 with a 1.4 OPS versus Espino. He's 3,900 FanDuel salary, 1,800 more on DraftKings. Projected at 12.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 12, and 9 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Freddie Freeman here versus Paulo Espino. I also like Salvador Perez with a 62% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Alexander Wells. Salvador Perez is batting 6% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .960 OPS versus lefties. And Alexander Wells, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters. 57% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.410 OPS versus righties. There's no at-bats versus Wells yet, and Salvador Perez is $3,900 FanDuel salary, $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 29, and 48 fantasy points in his last 3 games. He's in a fantastic spot here tonight, so I like Salvador Perez here versus Alexander Wells. I also like Joey Votto with an 81% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Adrian Sampson. Joey Votto is batting 29% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .935 OPS versus righties. And Adrian Sampson, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters. 52% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1 OPS versus lefties. Joey Votto is 1 for 2 with a 1.5 OPS versus Sampson. He's $3,500 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 0, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So he's in a great spot. So I like Joey Votto here versus Adrian Sampson. Okay, now coming down in salary a little bit here, I like Ty France with a 37% batting advantage over Jake Odorizzi. Ty France is batting 20% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .895 OPS versus righties. And Jake Odorizzi, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters. 17% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .946 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Ty France is 4 for 6, batting a .667 batting average and a 1.467 OPS versus Odorizzi. And Ty France is $3,000 FanDuel salary, $1,500 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 18, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Ty France here versus Jake Odorizzi. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I got a value play for you. I like Tony Kemp with a 23% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jimmy Lambert. Tony Kemp is batting 44% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .745 OPS versus righties, and Jimmy Lambert is giving up a 1 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Lambert yet, but I like this pick because Tony Kemp is only $2,200 FanDuel salary and only $400 more on DraftKings, so I like that price on both sites. He's projected at 10 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 7 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 29, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Tony Kemp here versus Jimmy Lambert.
Real quick guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now I also like Jean Segura with a 33% batting advantage over Eric Lauer. Jean Segura, he's batting 13% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .859 OPS versus lefties. And Eric Lauer, he pitches 21% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .896 OPS versus righties. Now he is 0 for 2 versus Lauer, and he's $3,300 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.5 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 41, 0, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Gene Shigura here versus Eric Lauer. I also like Whit Merrifield with a 62% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, Alexander Wells. Whit Merrifield is batting 5% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .773 OPS versus lefties. And Alexander Wells, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters. 57% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.410 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Wells yet, and Whit Merrifield is $3,200 FanDuel salary. He's $2,000 more on DraftKings, so I love that FanDuel price. He's projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 16, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Whit Merrifield here versus Alexander Wells. Okay, now here is a FanDuel value play. This guy's just consistently underpriced on FanDuel, especially when he's facing righty pitchers. So I like Mike Moustakas with a 92% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Adrian Sampson. Mike Moustakas is batting 39% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .825 OPS versus righties. And Adrian Sampson, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 52% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1 OPS versus lefties. Now, Mike Moustakas is 0 for 3 versus Sampson, but the splits are fantastic, and he's only $2,300 FanDuel salary. Now, he's $2,700 more on DraftKings, so gonna pass on him on DK, but I love that FanDuel price. And he's projected at 9.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 10 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Mike Moustakas on FanDuel here versus Adrian Sampson. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Austin Riley with a 22% batting advantage over the low salary pitcher, Paulo Espino. Austin Riley is batting 9% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .834 OPS versus righties. And Paulo Espino, he's pitching 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .815 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because Austin Riley is 3 for 4, batting a .750 batting average and a 2.250 OPS versus Espino. He's $3,700 FanDuel salary, $1,700 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 29, 7, and 13 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Austin Riley here versus Paulo Espino. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? I like Brandon Crawford with a 14% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Chichi Gonzalez. Brandon Crawford bats 20% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .866 OPS versus righties. And Chichi Gonzalez, he's giving up a .856 OPS versus lefties. Now I like this pick because Brandon Crawford is 5 for 9, batting a .556 batting average and a 1.692 OPS versus Gonzalez. He's only $3,300 FanDuel salary, 1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 22, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. I also like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 11.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So it looks like this could be a good game to stack. So I like Brandon Crawford here versus Chichi Gonzalez. Okay, now here's another value play. I like Yanni Hernandez with a 59% batting advantage over Zach Gallen. Yanni Hernandez is batting 27% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .679 OPS versus righties. And Zach Gallen, he pitches his worst ball versus switch hitters, 33% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .997 OPS versus switch hitters. There's no at-bats versus Gallen yet, but Yanni Hernandez is only $2,400 FanDuel salary and only 100 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. Projected at 10.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 13, 21, and 3 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Yanni Hernandez here versus Zach Gallen. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I think this guy could be a home run hitter tonight. I like Starling Marte with a 31% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jimmy Lambert. Starling Marte is batting 10% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .824 OPS versus righties. And Jimmy Lambert, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 21% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .263 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Lambert yet, and Starling Marte is $3,900 FanDuel salary, $1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 12, and 16 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Starling Marte here versus Jimmy Lambert. I don't know why I didn't have this guy marked for you. Take a look at Frank Schwindel with an 88% batting advantage over Wade Miley. Frank Schwindel is batting 25% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .254 OPS versus lefties. And Wade Miley, he pitches his worst ball by far to righty batters, 63% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .943 OPS versus righties. Now Frank Schwindel is 1 for 3 with a 1 OPS versus Miley. He's $3,800 FanDuel salary, $300 less on DraftKings, projected at 12 fantasy points here tonight. He's projected at 13.4 fantasy points here tonight, and he's averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. And man, this guy's been on fire, scoring 13, 41, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Frank Schwindel here versus Wade Miley. There's just a lot of batters in great spots here tonight. That's why I'm somewhat considering trying to save some salary at the pitcher position. But then you got that stud pitcher, Garrett Cole, who's in such a good spot, but he's super expensive and he's going to eat all your salary for your batters. So it's a slate with a lot of opportunity on it. Probably going to be a high-scoring night, but let's see what happens. Let's keep going on these picks. Kyle Schwarber's in a good spot. Let's take a look down here, saving a little bit of salary. Take a look at Alex Verdugo with a 64% batting advantage over Drew Rasmussen. Alex Verdugo, he's batting 27% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .894 OPS versus righties. And Drew Rasmussen, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters, 37% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .892 OPS versus lefties. And Alex Verdugo is 2 for 4, batting .500 with a 1.750 OPS versus Rasmussen. He's 3,200 FanDuel salary, 700 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 7, 12, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Alex Verdugo here versus Drew Rasmussen. Okay, another guy you can save a bit of salary on who's in a fantastic spot. Take a look at Andrew McCutchen with a 56% batting advantage over Eric Lauer. Andrew McCutchen is batting 35% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.014 OPS versus lefties. And Eric Lauer, he pitches 21% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .896 OPS versus righties. Now, I like this pick because Andrew McCutchen is 7 for 11, batting a .636 batting average and a 2.056 OPS versus Lauer. 2 of those 7 hits were for home runs, and he's got a triple in there. And he's only 3,100 FanDuel salary and only 700 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, projected at 10.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 19, 3, and 19 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Andrew McCutchen here versus Eric Lauer. Okay, another value play, at least on FanDuel, he's a super value play. Take a look at Michael Brantley with a 25% batting advantage over Logan Gilbert. Michael Brantley is batting 34% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .922 OPS versus righties, and Logan Gilbert is giving up a .719 OPS versus lefties. And Michael Brantley is 2 for 5, batting .400 with a .800 OPS versus Gilbert. He's only 2,700 FanDuel salary. Now finally, DraftKings has him priced up. They were underpricing Michael Brantley for the longest time. I was taking advantage of that. But Michael Brantley is 1,400 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. Now FanDuel is underpricing him, and he's projected at 10.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 6 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Logan Gilbert.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.